of the Institute of Actuaries, UK, an Associate Fellow of the Institute of Mathematics and its Applications, UK, and a Fellow of Actuarial Society of Ghana. He is also a graduate of the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, Kumasi, with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mathematics. He was a member of the Presidential Commission on Pensions from July 2004 to September 2006, and the lead architect of the new contributory three-tier pension system for Ghana. He was appointed project consultant by the government of Ghana to the Pension Reform Implementation Committee, and then led a team that prepared the proposals for the National Pension Reform Bill, which was eventually passed. From January 2010 to March 2011, our guest speaker was the first acting chief executive officer of the National Pensions Regulatory Authority. He prepared the proposal leading to the occupational and then personal pensions regulations. He has also had over 20 years experience with the insurance industry, mostly in top management positions. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest speaker have authored a lot of articles, and his articles have been quoted in a lot of articles, also quoted in a lot of research work, and most of his articles have also led to policy formulations. Ladies and gentlemen, he was also the Chief Executive Officer of Metropolitan Insurance Company Limited, during which period he transformed the practice of life insurance in Ghana, introducing the concept of hybrid insurance products. At this juncture, I want us all to welcome Mr. Daniel Aidoo Mensah as our guest speaker to take us through the theme of this occasion. Thank you very much.
Well, Thomas, thank you for the nice things you said about me. I'm sure the president knows me very well. So you should have just said the president knows Aidoo Mensah. Yes, I accepted to take on this lecture, even though I was trying to retire, because number one, maybe most of you don't know, I had a lot of cooperation and input for some members of your association. I'm not going to name them, but when we were doing the pension reforms, we did it with an open arms, and some of the inputs that came to the law and regulations actually came from members of the industry. And so let me start a formal presentation. I'm going to read from my computer. So if you see my head shifting, it's not that I'm trying to run away. I'm just trying to read from the computer. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the Governing Council, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly humbled and honored to be invited as the guest speaker for this memorial lecture. I understand, Mr. Chairman, the lecture is to honor our comrades who departed us during the pandemic. In this regard, I wish to dedicate this lecture to the memories of the departed colleagues, Solomon, Samuel, and Damien, all of whom I knew very well. I also wish to dedicate this lecture to the memory of the late Dr. T.A. Bediakun, the father of the pensions reform, who died earlier. May their souls rest in perfect peace. I'm required to speak on the topic 10 years of pension reform in Ghana, the lessons learned and the way forward. Mr. Chairman, to put the topic in the right perspective and for a better understanding of the issues at stake, I've divided my presentation into 4 sections. In section 1, I'm going to give the background to the pension reforms in Ghana. It takes a critical look at the state of Ghana's pension system just before the pension reform. So that is what was there before the reform. Section 2 examines the rationale for the new 3-tier pension system. To answer the question, why was the 3-tier recommended. It will show particularly how the key issues raised by workers and other stakeholders were addressed by the Pensions Commission in its recommendations for a new three-tier pension system for Ghana. In section 3, we'll look at implementation of the three-tier pension system, the challenges encountered so far, and the lessons learned. Then in session 4, we'll look at the way forward, and I'll give my concluding remarks. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll start the formal presentation. First, background to the pension reform in Ghana. I will make the lecture available to all of you. So I've prepared a formal lecture, but I'm not going to go through it all. I'll skip some of them. Okay. So first, the background to the pension reform. Now, before the pension reform, Ghana had two major pension parallel schemes running. The capitated pension scheme for the public servants, and then the SNIT scheme, which was introduced in 1972 for all employees in the private and public sectors. Then there were other public pension schemes like the Ghana University Staff Pension Scheme and the Ghana Armed Forces Pension Scheme, which has a semblance of the capitated scheme in form and substance. There were disparities between these two major pension schemes, and over the years, this disparity became so pronounced, leading to agitation and protest by some public sector workers on the SNIT scheme, demanding to be placed on the capitated scheme, which was considered more favorable, particularly the lump sum element. Chairman, I will explain and skip some of the lectures. There was a capitated and there was the SNIT pension scheme. Now, before 1972, all public service workers were on the capitated pension scheme, and then they will give option to either join the capitated, either remain on the capitated or to join the SNIT scheme. So obviously, those who are risk averse stay on the capitated, and others join the SNIT scheme. So let me take two friends, Mr. A and Mr. B, who were about the same age and on the capitated. So on 1st January 1972, Mr. A decided to remain on the capitated. Mr. B decided to join the SNIT pension scheme. They were about the same age. Now, when it came to the time for retirement, they went to receive their pension benefits. And then Mr. A, who remained on the capitated scheme, received, okay, all the pension schemes had two types of benefits: a lump sum benefit when you retire, and then annuities, monthly pensions whilst you're on retirement. So Mr. A on the capitated scheme went for his pension first for the lump sum and was paid 2,500 Ghana cedis as his lump sum, just illustration. Mr. B, who joined the SNIT scheme, went for his lump sum, and then he was paid 1,000 Ghana cedis. So in effect, Mr. B, who remained on capitated, Mr. A, who remained on capitated, had about 2.5 times the lump sum benefit that the person on the SNIT scheme received. In terms of the monthly pensions, they were about the same. So the challenge was with the monthly pensions. And that was the beginning of the agitation for the pension reforms. Workers who joined the SNIT scheme said no. They also wanted better pensions. So therefore, they agitated to be placed on the capitated scheme. But then there were reasons for the disparity. The fact that one had 2.5 times the other person. It was simply because the capitated scheme was not a funded scheme. Okay, it was paid from government revenue. It was not funded like SNIT, where you paid contribution. It was funded. The capitated was not based on only actuarial principles like SNIT. For example, in paying the lump sum, they did not take care of any discounting to take care of time value of money. The captains were given lump sum, so there were disparities. Again, typically, if you take the two workers and government's contribution towards their pensions, for the one on the SNIT scheme, government as an employer paid 12.5% at that time before the reform. For the same, the other colleague who was on the SNIT, the captaincy scheme, government paid about 24% of contribution to get the same amount of person. So this was the disparity that led to the agitation. So workers started agitation to join the SNIT scheme. And therefore, at that time, President Kufuor was the president of Ghana. So he decided that, look, I think even though one had 2,500 and the other had 1,000, they all complained that the pension was still not adequate for them. So the fact was that the pension was not adequate for all of them, but then one was worse off. The one on the Senate was worse off. So President Kufuor, and for me, that was one of the best legacies left for this country. He started the pension reform. He started the pension reform. At this stage, what I'll do is that I'll just give the milestones of the pension reform. I won't go through the whole this and that. So in July 2004, he initiated a major pension reform with Dr. Bediako as the chairman of a pensions commission. And the commission went through, public sittings, and at the end of it all, came out with a pensions commission report in March 2006. The objective of the pension reform overall was to ensure retirement income security for Ghanaian workers. That was the objective of the reform that President Kufuor gave the commission. So the commission was to come out with a new scheme of schemes that will ensure retirement income security for the Ghanaian worker. So the first challenge was that what was meant by retirement income security. Mr. Chairman, as we go along, I'll try to explain some of these issues. Then there were other recommendations. For example, the commission recommended that the captaincy scheme should be phased out in terms of fairness and charge to government. So government accepted the report and the recommendations, in fact, all the recommendations of the pensions commissions. And in July 2006, they came out with a white paper. Then the president set up a pensions implementation committee to implement the decisions of the pensions commission. So an 8-member committee was set up. And even though I was a member of the commission, I came on as a consultant. So just to explain, in the first set, I was a member of the commission. In the second set, I was there, but I was a consultant to the pensions committee. So the committee went around, I said, again, went through a couple of things, look at the issues at stake, which we'll go through as we go along, and came back with a pensions reform in August. I think in June 2004, it went to Parliament, and in August 2007, it was passed by Parliament. On 12th August, a new Pensions Act was passed to put all the recommendations into a law. Sorry, I'm rushing through because these are just the background. I'll give the text to you. So now, the new pensions system established a 3-tier pension system to replace the SNIT scheme, and it was also to replace the captaincy pension scheme. Now, I'm saying it was also to replace because there's a caveat. At a certain point in time, challenges will come to this again. So in August 2006 and 2009, the first board of the pensions, MPRA, chaired by Mr. Kwame Asante, was inaugurated. And then in September 16, 2009, after several years of waiting, President Atta Mills formally inaugurated a new pension scheme. So the implementation started from 1st January 2010. So after 3 months from the formal launching by the president, we started the main implementation of the scheme with the mandatory schemes. The Pension Act did not make a recommendation for trustees and corporate trustees and service providers to be accredited by the pensions MPRA within 90 days. That didn't happen. We'll come to that again. So it started with the mandatory schemes, waiting for the service providers to be accredited to start the third tier. It was later on that they came on board. Mr. Chairman, with this background, which I've rushed through quickly, I'm going to slow down. I'm now going to take the rationale for the three-tier pension scheme. So why was a new three-tier pension system recommended to replace the old scheme? And now, as I said earlier on, during the commission's sittings, one of the major issues that came up from organized labor was the inadequacy of pensions. And like I said before, even those who were on the capitated scheme and were getting about 2.5 times those on Senate still complained that it was inadequate. So the first challenge was that the pension was inadequate. And therefore, how do we ensure an adequate pension for the Ghanaian worker? Mr. Chairman, luckily, there is a scientific way to mention adequacy. And that was what we fell on. Now, to measure adequacy, you determine a person's income replacement ratio. And I'm going to explain. Okay. You determine a person's income replacement ratio. You look at the person's last income, salary. And then you look at his first pension income and compare the two and see how much of his earnings before retirement is being replaced in retirement. And that is what we call the pension's income replacement ratio. For example, Mr. A was working and just his last paycheck was 1,000 cedis. So he's not going to transition into a new life. So from an active worker to a retiree. So let's say on day one, he's about to go on retirement. His salary was 1,000 cedis. The next day he goes on retirement and he's paid 600 Ghana cedis. So what it means is that 60% of his income has been replaced. And therefore we'll say that his income replacement ratio is 60%. Another example, if the same person whose last income was 1,000 cedis received a pension income of 650 Ghana cedis, we will say that his income replacement ratio is what? Is 65%. If he receives 700 cedis against the 1,000, 70%. So that is the way you mention adequacy. So globally, countries look at how much of one's income is replaced in pensions to determine whether they are providing adequate pension. And as usual, the World Bank and international business have come out with some standards. But the global standards in any country that provides a pension replacement of 67% is regarded as providing adequate pensions. Okay, so in that regard, we didn't seem to have much problem with Ghana, because if you take the city scheme before the reform, for a 30-year-old at that time who had 30 years more to go on retirement, his income replacement ratio was 65%, very close to the global standard. So that wasn't a problem. But Mr. Chairman, the reasons for paying less in pension did not take into consideration our social cultural environment and systems. Okay, the reason why the global standards proposes that you earn less in pension, 67%, is that when you go on retirement, your income needs reduces. So that's the global standard. But you and I know very strongly that in Africa, in Ghana, that's not the case. It is rather the reverse of what the global standard says. Okay. In Africa, in Ghana, for that matter, when you go on retirement, your income needs rather reduces. Okay. And that is what the Global World Bank, that's what they tend to ignore. And we said, no, we would look at the pensions reform, but also considering the income, the other social cultural factors. For example, Mr. Chairman, in Ghana, a typical problem for a retiree is that when you go to retirement, you may be attending a number of funerals. Okay, because at this time you have nothing to do. You're in the village, so every funeral you have to attend. When there is a naming ceremony, they will say, "Oh, Mr. Aidoo Mensah worked before his retirement, his money." So they make him the chairman. You will need to find some money. So there were a lot of pressure on retirees. So rather in Africa and in Ghana for that matter, a retiree needs more income than when he was on retirement to meet the other social needs. And like the foreign countries, we also didn't have a system that provided social benefits, like housing and that thing for retirees. So most people retired, and if they didn't plan their retirement very well, which is very necessary, they were not going to look for a home to live in. So this put more pressure there. So what the Pension Commission came out eventually was that no, if we came out with any new system that ignores this social cultural factor of our society, it is still going to fail. Workers will still complain about inadequate pensions. So the first recommendation was that we needed a pension system that would give an income ratio more than 67%. That's the first thing that we did. So the next thing was to go through the system and see how we're going to do that. So in the design of the new 3-tier pension scheme, 3 major factors were put into consideration. First, obviously, best practice schemes in the world. You can't ignore that. Then our Ghanaian social cultural environment. Okay. But one thing that we normally ignore in Africa and in Ghana, for that matter, is that we always go chasing best practice and ignore our own system. Okay. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, there is a big difference between best practice and best fit. Okay. What is best practice may not fit our system. Okay. What may work well in, say, UK or Canada or elsewhere may not work in Ghana because it may not be the practice that we do here. So we said that we needed a scheme that will ensure best fit for our Ghanaian environment. And therefore, whatever we do, we should look at a system that will give workers more than what they were getting before. Or in the worst case, they should go home with what they were earning before. Now, that was a critical determining factor in looking at the 3-tier pension system. So with all this into consideration, looking at our World Bank's international practice income ratio and our system, the Commission recommended a new 3-tier pension system for the Ghanaian worker. Now, because it's just not an association worker, I can't illustrate it. But what happened was that first, we look at the Senate scheme. That was the scheme there just about the double reform. And the Senate lump sum and the Senate's monthly pensions, and compared to the captivity pension scheme. Okay. In terms of the monthly pension, they were about the same. So there wasn't that much challenge between the captivity and the Senate scheme. The major challenge was the lump sum benefit that was being paid to members on the Senate scheme. So what was done was that first, we look at the composition of the Senate contribution of 17.5%. Okay. And then try to delineate it by the components. So Senate was paying a lump sum when he retired. Senate was paying a monthly pensions when he retired. And Senate was also, at that time, was being asked to contribute 2.5% toward the National Health Insurance Scheme. So, Mr. Chairman, at the time we were doing the reform, the amount going to pensions was not 17.5%, but it was 15%. That will also explain why eventually with, the new contribution came to 18.5%, because all the calculations were based on the 15%, not 17.5%. So when these calculations were done, it was decided that the lump sum can be taken away from Senate. Okay, because number one, we thought that Senate was doing a combination of defined benefit and the defined contribution in some sort. Okay. The lump sum payment and the Senate mainly defined social security scheme, we thought that we should strip off the lump sum for several reasons. Okay, apart from making it a defined contribution scheme, because in a defined benefit scheme, like the Senate scheme, the benefit is defined. There are pros and cons. Once the formula is determined, that's what they used to pay you. So whether the investment returns are getting better or not, the scheme will pay you as it is. But in a defined contribution scheme, when there are proper rules and the funds are invested, like you guys are doing, there's a possibility that the funds may grow. Now, as at the time Senate we're doing the pension, listen, the interest rate that we're doing was less than 10%. Okay. At the time of the reform, a time came that was about 30% and over. So we said that we will strip it off into the second tier. So the first tier was the annuities that the Senate was paying, which was kept with Senate. In the second tier was the lump sum that Senate was paying, which was stripped to the private sector to be privately managed. After that was done, the next thing is to assess the adequacy of this new system there. So an adequacy test was made on the new recommendations. Mr. Chairman, let me also emphasize that I've gone through a number of articles and there are still misunderstanding about reforms and the Senate this and there. Let me assure members that in the reform, whatever decision that was taken was tested scientifically when we work with the UK government actuary department. Okay, so reducing the annuities we pay in retirement, change the contribution and everything, they were all tested by the UK actuary department. Okay, and there's a paper there which is called conversion specification paper. If you are doing a reform and you want to change certain things, you do a conversion specification paper to test the recommendations. When they were all tested with all the things, the only little problem that was there that if Senate scheme was going to survive for 20 years, with the reform, it was going to be reduced by 1 year. That was the only challenge that was there. But otherwise, everything was tested before. So just for your information. So the 3-tier scheme was recommended for the Ghanaian citizen. Now, after all that was done, we saw that workers also had provident fund schemes with no tax incentives. And when we did the adequacy check, it was still discovered that the first and second tier scheme still will not give workers 100% or that adequate pension that they were looking for. And therefore, there was a recommendation that there must be a 3rd-tier voluntary scheme, but with tax incentives to encourage workers in the formal informal sector to try to introduce more pension systems, pay more contribution toward their systems. And let me just give you the adequacy test, the result of adequacy test. Now the result shows that depending on the age, for the first, before the Senate pension, the reform, for a 30-year-old, his total repayment ratio was 65%. With the new first and second tiers, that same person will earn between 74, will get between 74% and 79%. Okay, 54% in the first, maximum in the first tier, between 20 and 25% in the second tier, which is a defined contribution scheme. So immediately it showed that this system was going to give workers a little better than what was there before, but still it wasn't adequate. Now with a tax incentive of 16.5%, there was a new tax regime of 35%. Now it used to be 17.5%. Now with the new pension system, total contribution of 18.5%. It means that in the 3rd year, one could do 16.5% extra tax with tax relief. Okay. The challenge was to give education to the public, and I think this is one of the challenges that corporate trustee can take up, to know the importance of doing extra, because in the 3rd year voluntary, and the 2nd and 3rd tiers are all defined contribution schemes. So they have the same mechanism. So in the 3rd tier, if one adds another 5% to his contribution, he will get an additional 25% income replacement ratio. Okay. So it means that for the 30-year-old who will get 74% for the first and second year, if you contribute an additional 5% in the third year, you get another 25% to this. So it means that for any worker who contributes at least 5% in the third year will end up by getting between 99% and a little over 100% in the total pension that it is of income replacement ratio. So that was the rationale for the 3-tier. So number one, the test showed that the new system gives more than the 65% that was being paid by SNET. With the voluntary scheme, one could end up in the worst case by taking home 100% of what was earning before, the payment ratio. Now, the issue is that if it was not adequate, but one was used to receiving 1,000 cedis monthly income, the person has learned how to manage the 1,000 cedis over the period of time. You don't make the situation worse off when he goes on retirement by giving him less than 1,000 cedis, and that was the main idea of the 3-tier pension system. Mr. Chairman, having expanded the rationale for the 3-tier recommendation, let's now move to implementation. Okay, so the reform was there with other reasons, and the reasons why the 3-tier was recommended. The next thing was how to implement this 3-tier system, and that is where we are now. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll look at section 3, implementation, the challenges, the lessons learned from it. Mr. Chairman, one cannot deny the fact that the implementation of the new 3-tier pension system has faced a number of challenges, some of which are real and others created. I will enumerate the challenges that I'm aware of and offer suggestions for the way forward to engender further discussions. So what I'm going to do with is the challenges that I found myself. I'm sure you can add to these challenges as practitioners. The first, these challenges are not in any order. The first challenge was the perceived lack of political will to facilitate the implementation of the new pension system. There was no political will. It was not on the government front burner. And so as a result, there was inadequate funding support and lack of needed seed fund for the MPRA for the full implementation of the Pensions Act. This led to a lack of sustained public education about the virtues of the new pension scheme, and also affected the recruitment of very experienced and well-motivated technical staff. Well, for a long time, the MPRA lacked technical staff, let's face it. For a long time, they didn't have the adequate requisite staff to do it, and that was a major challenge initially for the reform. On the Joy FM Super Morning Show of 8 October 2012, to discuss problems facing the implementation of the new pension system, the late Dr. T.A. Bediakon, then a board member of the MPRA, admitted financial and administrative constraints that are unduly affecting the implementation of the system. He expressed among concerns that, and Mr. Chairman, I'm going to quote that from him. It's on myjoyonline.com, 8 October 2012. This is what Mr. Bediakon said. We don't have enough money and we depend on the government of Ghana. The budget we presented this year, that is 2012, we had 1/3 of it given to us. And we are supposed to receive money every month, but from January till now, that's October, at my last count, we had only 3 remittances, which are not enough and only not forthcoming, unquote. So that was Dr. Bediakon, his frustrations. The MPR will depend on Ghana government for budget allocation. Number one, the allocation wasn't enough and it wasn't forthcoming. So initially they were given 1/3 of the budget. And as at the time he was talking, in October, 10 months there, they had received only 3 remittances for the whole year. That was a major challenge. Mr. Chairman, another major challenge has been the instability in the leadership of the MPRA. 6 CEOs within 8 years, with an average tenure of 16 months. Mr. Chairman, like Thomas said, I was the first acting CEO of the MPRA, and I spent 15 months. And when I was replaced, when I was sacked, I think when I was sacked or replaced, 8 CEOs came on board within 6 years. Okay, so that was a major challenge. So there was no continuity in programs, and that was a major challenge. Then there were address reports on the work of the MPRA. Again, the type of press, people that we have, sometimes, they will give a major headline. Okay, that can give a shock as soon as you look at it. Now you go and read through it and you see that it does not reflect the headlines that they have given. Let me give you some examples. In the Chronicle of Tuesday, December 4, 2012, this is the heading: Scandal Rocks Pension Scheme. That was the major heading. Now read through it, there was a disconnect. Then in the graphic business of Monday, October 4th, 2012, new pension scheme under threat. Okay, Mr. Chairman, this were not good for any scheme that was being implemented. Okay, it gave a scare to government, to people. And this uncertainty created some doubts and frustrations in the mind of people. Again, let me read some of the frustrations that came to the press at that time. There was this article by one Charles Benoni Okan in the graphic business, 25th September 2012. Some of the papers, I'm going to read what was put in the graphic. This is what he said. The MPRA set 3 deadlines for the licensing of pension schemes of companies, but have had to postpone 3 times without concrete reason. The first deadline of April 30, 2012 was later changed to June 2012 and subsequently to August 31st, 2012. The August 31st deadline is passed without a single pension provident fund scheme license. The situation is creating serious anxiety among players in the industry. The chairman, that was a major challenge. Then there was wrongful interpretation of some provisions in the pensions law. That's bringing conflict between government and its workers on the management of the mandatory second-tier occupational pension scheme, leading to court action. And I'm sure you were all privy to that when government and its workers went to court for interpretation. But Mr. Chairman, members, when you go look at sections 95, 96, 98, it provides clarity on how the pension scheme was supposed to be managed. Then, of course, recently, was it last year, there has been a decision by the MPRA to be the sole provider of training for trustees, contrary to what Regulation 7 says. So the MPRA now is going to be the sole trainer of trustees. But even Regulation 7.7, it said will accredit institutions to do that. Now, these are all challenges and interpretations of the law. Then, registration of pension fund custodians, contrary to Section 158 of Act 766. So there were no Chinese walls. And the impact of recent challenges in the banking financial sector was a typical example. So here was a situation where you take a typical bank. The bank has a fund manager, management company. The bank also has a pension fund custodian company. And in most of these banks there, it was just a treasury department that was carved to become a pension fund custodian. There were no Chinese walls. So when there were problems, I don't know how this were managed during the banking sector reform. Then there was lack of resources for massive education of the millions in the informal sector. This has led to a delay in expanding coverage for the informal sector. Mr. Chairman, as we speak now, I don't know of recent developments, but there are still no appropriate regulations and guidelines for the operation of the informal sector pension schemes. Mr. Chairman, you cannot have the same regulations for the informal sector and the formal sector. They are two different, the opposite ends. Okay. Let's take a typical example. You take retirement age. Formal sector is 60 years. Now, how do you define the retirement age for the informal sector? Take a tomato seller who is selling tomatoes at Makola. You can't say retirement is 60. For her, as soon as she is not strong enough to go to market, she's on retirement. And therefore, all these things need to be looked at, contributions and collections. So as I speak now, I don't know of late, but there are no appropriate regulations for the guidelines for the operation of informal sector schemes. And then another key challenge, and I'm sure you are encountering, is the absence of effective contribution collection systems adaptable to this informal wage earnings. I was trying to help a company develop an informal sector scheme, and they were trying to use the telcos or listen there. Mr. Chairman, the charges that was come was enough to withhold doing that. Then the delays in transferring funds from the TPFA into individual accounts, Mr. Chairman, it took 7 good years between 2010 and 2017, contrary to Section 2184 of the Pensions Act, which stipulated a period of within 90 days. So what the law said was that within 90 days from the establishment of the MPRA, they should license service providers, as I said before, to be able to manage these schemes. So these schemes were locked up for 7 years without being transferred. Well, later on, eventually they were transferred. But in terms of what you guys will have done in terms of investment returns, that is another matter. So, Mr. Chairman, these were some of the challenges that I can think of immediately. There are a number of challenges, but I'm sure that you can add to this list. Having looked at some of these challenges, Mr. Chairman, let me hazard to make some few recommendations as a way forward. Well, I'm using the word hazard because in this country, it is easy to attach political connotations to whatever one says in public. But here we are. So let's go ahead and make some few recommendations way forward. The first recommendation is government's role in these pensions. Pension issues must be placed on the front burner of the national agenda. And it must be given the needed financial and material support. It must also be devoid of any political interference. That's my first way forward. Okay. So in this country, any government comes, it means that there must be a new changes, board CEOs or this and that. No. Government must ensure that funds of the MPRA are applied solely for the development of the pensions industry. The Chairman, that is what is done elsewhere. Number two, phasing out the captivity. As I've said, I tried to give rationale for why the captivity was not sustainable and why the reform said that it should be phased out. It must be phased out to eliminate the inequities that exist as recommended in the Pensions Act. Earlier on in 2019, we learned that Cabinet had given approval for a roadmap to be developed to unify all pension systems in the country by 2021. That is in line with Section 213 of the Pensions Act. And I thought that was a step in the right direction. The Chairman, unfortunately, however, government backtracked with new directives for the Security Service to revert to the existing pension schemes. So, catch-21 situation. It was done earlier on at some point in time, it came on, reform came, so we are moving in circles. So, the reform said, with the reasons, phase out this for these reasons, they have reverted to that. So that's the challenge. If you read the DNA report of August 20, the report is, I'm not going to read that. Then the law issues of low pensions. Mr. Chairman, that was one of the major reasons for the agitation and what happened. But however, elsewhere in the world where they have very good pensions, the pension schemes contributions are based on basic salary and allowances. Okay. They are based on considered salaries. Now, if you look at payroll, well, at the time that I was in the system, the allowances formed about 60% of benefits. The pension salary as we have now uses only basic salary as the determinant for contributions. Going forward, Mr. Chairman, I strongly recommend that there must be a redefinition of pensionable salary to include some allowances as a way of improving pension benefits. For me, that's the surest way. If you leave out allowances and enjoy that now and leave it, the pensions there, as the top used to say, that in this world, there are two things that we all face. If you don't die early, you go on retirement, or you may die early. But we definitely face these two things. So it's necessary that we give adequate education for people to be concerned about their pensions and making a good contribution for a better pension. Then the informal sector participation. Mr. Chairman, the voluntary third-year personal pension scheme has been specially designed to meet the special needs of the informal sector in terms of how much they can contribute, and also the benefits are structured to meet their short-term and retirement needs. So if you look at the law, the informal sector people have two accounts, account A, account B. Account A is more like a savings account. They can make withdrawals. Account B for retirement. Now they were made purposely to suit the needs of the informal sector. Adequate resources must be made available for a massive national educational campaign to sensitize and encourage the informal sector to participate in pension schemes. Group personal pension schemes must be promoted for identified groups such as farmers, fishermen, market women, GPITU, SIBA, and other corporate groups. Mr. Chairman, of late, we were able to design a cocoa farmers pension scheme using a pricing mechanism. But the informal sector is about 85% of the working population. And there's a lot of money there. So there's a need to be concerned about that so that we can increase the volume of pension participation. Mr. Chairman was talking about, is it 25 billion, 30 billion in the asset under management? It looks attractive, Mr. Chairman, but that was not what the reform anticipated. But now we're talking about figures in trillions, if things have gone the way that we expected. So there's a need for more to be done. There must be appropriate and relevant regulations and guidelines for the operation of informal sector schemes. The objective is not to impose the rules governing the structured formal sector on the informal sector, but to apply rules which take into account of its specific nature and aspirations of those who operate in it. We must develop innovative approaches of effective contribution collecting systems adaptable to the informal sector. As I said, for example, an issue is using the pricing mechanism, where for the cocoa farmers pension scheme, their contributions are made for deduction from the sale of cocoa. These are some of the innovations that can be introduced. And incentives can also be provided to the informal sector contribution, such as tax holidays and matching of contributions. Elsewhere, for example, in Hong Kong, they match contribution, their tax holidays. So, after the reform, I recommended when I was the acting CEO that, look, let us come out with a caveat that for the informal sector, if you make a contribution to the pension scheme, maybe for the first 2 years, you don't pay tax. But well, we are still waiting for a positive response. So, Mr. Chairman, these are some of the recommendations that I will make within the time that we have at our disposal. So in my concluding remarks, Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it was envisaged that the new 3-tier pension scheme will enhance pension benefits and increase the retirement income security of workers, both in the formal and informal sectors. The introduction of the new three-tier pension scheme was expected to bring into existence a formal system of retirement protection for Ghanaian workers, both in the formal and informal sector. The benefits accruing from the scheme will be an important source of meeting the financial needs of workers after their retirement. To this end, it is my expectation that a system of prudential supervision and regulation is always, and I'm underlining the word always, in place to protect scheme members' interests and also safeguard the stability of the pension system. It is also very expedient to have a very well-resourced professional trade association for all licensed corporate trustees to lead formal engagement on issues of common interest. To this end, Mr. Chairman, permit me to use this opportunity to congratulate the founding fathers and the promoters of the Chamber of Corporate Trustees. I trust that within the time constraint I have been able to give you an insight into the pension reform and what it is intended to achieve. That is retirement income security for the Ghanaian worker. Just as was envisaged by the founding fathers and promoters of this August Chamber, the role of pensions in the promotion of economic development and as a tool for social intervention programs through the mobilization of long-term retirement savings cannot be overemphasized. It was also expected to add impetus to the further development of the financial markets and eventually lead Ghana into economic independence and prosperity. Mr. Chairman, countries elsewhere have developed on the back of pensions. South Africa, Denmark, pensions. On this note, I wish the Chamber of Corporate Trustees success and continuing relevance. Long live the Chamber of Corporate Trustees of Ghana. Long live the Republic of Ghana. And thank you very much for listening.